You remember it as a harmless cartoon. Saturday morning, cereal and pajamas.
Well, you're talking about one of my all-time favorite shows.
But go back and watch Jonny Quest as an adult and something's wrong.
They love the character, they love that show, they want to see the movie.
People die, on screen, constantly. Shot, crushed, burned, eaten.
I don't blame them, poor fellas. Probably they're god of evil.
It is a war.
This was aimed at children, and somehow nobody stopped it.
Jonny Quest story, and they just made another 65 half hours of it.
How does a kid's cartoon get away with showing more death than most war movies?
Do not go, senores. It's very bad for us.
Sorry, Montoya.
The answer isn't what you think, and it starts with one fact almost everyone gets wrong. The body count, nobody counted. Start with the dying. In a typical episode, the violence isn't hinted at, it's shown. Henchmen are shot and fall, enemies are crushed under collapsing rock. One villain dissolves, another gets dragged screaming into the dark by something with too many legs.
And that had a young boy in it, an adventurer, and a sexy gal called Jezebel, I think.
People don't get captured, they get killed. And the show never looks away. No cutaway, no soft landing, no, don't worry, he's fine. A man dies and the story just moves on.
Dan Lin and I have been developing Jonny Quest for 8 years, and a lot of, starts and stops.
The way real danger moves on. Kids loved it. Most never counted the bodies. You don't when you're 9. It's only as an adult watching again that the number starts to climb, and you realize you were watching something far darker than you remembered.
Someone is coming. Can you see who it is? No, but I'm ready for him.
One more strange thing while we're here. Every episode ended with footage of 2 boys escaping a tribe of spear-throwing warriors by hovercraft. 2 boys who never appear in a single episode of the show. Nobody watching had any idea who they were. But first, who let an 11-year-old walk into the middle of all that killing?
I don't subscribe to the notion that they were completely different movies, but that's the reality of the studio world.
A child in the war zone, Jonny himself. That's who. He's 11 years old, and his father takes him into places that would rattle a trained soldier. Active volcanoes, enemy military compounds, jungles crawling with armed men, sunken wreckage, hostile borders. Today, a parent gets side-eyed for letting a kid ride a bike without a helmet. Dr. Quest hands his son a running start into a firefight. One week, the boy is trapped in a flooding underwater lab. The next, he's slipping through an armed compound where grown men are trying to kill him. This is the entertainment. This is the fun.
Ugala must be native for stroke.
And here's the part that stays with you. Nobody in the show ever flinches. Not the father, not the bodyguard, not Jonny. The adults treat mortal danger like a normal Tuesday. The quiet message to every child watching was unmistakable. The world is dangerous and you are expected to be brave in it. No children's show would dare send that message now. So how did this one? A big piece of the answer stood next to Jonny in nearly every scene. A man who solved problems in a way no cartoon hero was supposed to.
Not at the time that I thought of it. Way before that, there used to be a comic strip called Terry and the Pirate. Super comic strip drawn by a man called Milton Caniff.
The bodyguard who didn't talk it out. His name was Race Bannon. He was not there to teach lessons about sharing. Most cartoon heroes try words first. Race skipped that step. Threaten a family and he hit you, threw you, shot at you. And if the jungle or the sea was about to finish the job, he was content to let it. Villains who tangled with Race often simply never showed up again. No redemption arc, no they learned their lesson. Just gone.
Them, poor fellas. Probably they're god of evil.
It is a warning.
Warning?
See?
For a program made for children, that's astonishing. Race wasn't a babysitter who happened to carry a gun. He was a government man, an ex-agent, and the show treated lethal force as a fair answer to a lethal threat. That alone should have set off alarms, and one day it would. A group was already forming that would put shows exactly like this in its crosshairs. But not yet. Not for years. First, the monsters. And the monsters are the part a whole generation never got over.
But everywhere I go around the world, when people find out I'm involved with Jonny Quest, doesn't matter how old they are, 40.
The nightmares they animated. Ask anyone who watched Jonny Quest as a kid what they remember. A surprising number name the same thing. Not a hero, a monster. These weren't cuddly. They were built to scare. An invisible energy creature you could only spot when it moved. A living mummy, Giant spiders, mutated radioactive things crawling out of the dark. And because the animation took itself seriously, strikingly, unusually seriously, the monsters didn't look silly. They looked like they could come through the screen. Plenty of grown adults can still name the exact episode that kept them awake 60 years ago. That's not nostalgia, that's a scar. A show for children left marks that lasted a lifetime. Which brings us back to the thing we keep circling. Every piece of this, the deaths, the danger, the gunfire, the nightmares, should have been impossible on a kid's cartoon. Unless it was never a kid's cartoon at all.
This particular year, one of the things I developed was Jonny Quest.
The fear underneath the fun. Here's what those children were really watching without knowing it. Strip away the monsters and Jonny Quest is soaked in the anxieties of 1964. Espionage, shadow governments, enemy agents with foreign accents, nuclear technology, biological weapons, secret bases. This was the peak of the Cold War. The adults in the room recognized every bit of it. The spies, the arms race, the feeling that the world might end on someone's bad morning. The kids saw adventure. The parents saw their own nightmares dressed up as a cartoon. A show working on two levels at once, one for the child, one for the adult sitting beside them. And no Cold War story is complete without a mastermind. This one had one of the greatest ever drawn.
So Dan and I are now working with Robert Rodriguez, who's directing, co-writing with Terry Rossio. They've turned in a draft, which is phenomenal.
The Bond villain in a kid's show. Dr. Zinn didn't rob banks. He wasn't a bumbling crook undone by a laugh track. He wanted the world. Advanced weapons, mass destruction, real political power. He was a genuine international criminal mastermind. Calm, brilliant, and authentically menacing. He belonged in a spy thriller, not a Saturday lineup. And that was no accident. The producers had just seen the very first James Bond film, Dr. No, and wanted that exact energy. In the early going, they even handed Dr. Quest a Bond-style government code number. The whole show was chasing the feeling of a grown-up spy picture, which is why it never once talked down to the kids watching it.
And the whole look of it was comic book style, you know, real super looking guys and vehicles and people like that.
It refused to explain itself. This is the part that startles modern viewers most. Jonny Quest didn't slow down to explain things. Characters discussed real science, real strategy, real geopolitics, and the writing simply assumed you could keep up. Didn't follow the physics, the politics, the weapon? Fine, you'd catch up. Or you wouldn't, and you'd accept that adults knew things you didn't yet. That respect was the whole texture of the thing. It treated an 8-year-old like a junior adult, not a fragile mind to be managed. None of that fits how we make children's television today. And by now, you can probably feel the truth this show has been hiding from you this whole time. It was never really a children's show.
And we set up a date with one of the agencies, and we went in and we played that, and I gotta tell you, it knocked them out of their chairs.
The fact almost everyone gets wrong. Here it is, the one fact that rewrites everything you've just heard. Jonny Quest did not debut on Saturday morning. It premiered on a Friday night, September 18th, 1964, 7:30 in the evening on ABC, prime time, the same turf as the grown-up dramas and the variety hours. It was built for the whole family to watch together, after dinner with the lights on. And suddenly, all of it makes sense. The death, the guns, the Cold War dread, the villain lifted from a spy film, the refusal to dumb anything down. None of it was aimed at toddlers because it wasn't airing for toddlers. It was an adventure series that happened to be animated. The Saturday morning cartoon you remember? That came afterward, when the reruns got shoved into the kids slot, and a primetime adventure quietly got reclassified as children's entertainment. You didn't remember the show wrong, you were handed it in the wrong context. And once you see it for what it was, primetime television for adults and kids alike, the only real puzzle left is how on earth it ever looked the way it did.
Real action adventure, the first anybody ever did, and sold the show on that piece of film.
Count it again. Now run back through everything with that one fact in your head and watch the whole show change shape. The constant killing? That's a primetime adventure, not a toddler's program. The 11-year-old in the war zone? That's a hero built for the family hour. The bodyguard who shoots first? That's a spy series. The Cold War dread, the Bond villain, the flat refusal to explain anything. Every single piece that felt too dark for children was never made for children alone.
Guns with 42 barrels on it and arms and arms armor and all that stuff.
It all lines up. One detail and the mystery collapses into sense. But the deepest question is still standing there, unanswered. Not why the show was so dark, why it looked like nothing else on television.
So that was the Jonny Quest direction, which has since now opened up in many directions. People with these superheroes now with...
Drawn like a movie, not a cartoon. Put it next to anything else the same studio made in the 60s. Most of those shows were flat, simple, cheap, round little figures bouncing across plain backgrounds. Jonny Quest looks like a different art form. Realistic proportions, detailed painted backgrounds, hard shadows, framing pulled straight out of comic books and film. That was one man's obsession. The creator, Doug Wildey, came out of comics, and he wanted animation that felt like live action. Like a movie you could believe. He fought for the detail. He modeled the whole look on a classic adventure comic strip and pushed his artists to draw illustratively, which most of them had never done in their lives. That obsession is the thing you couldn't see but could always feel. It's also, as it turns out, the thing that would eventually kill the show. And it explains those two mystery boys in the closing credits.
All the action and adventure, but also had a relationship between the father and son.
The show that was almost something else. Before it was Jonny Quest, it was supposed to be something completely different. Wildey was first hired to adapt an old radio adventure hero, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. He built a test reel. He imagined what the future would look like and drew it. And then the rights fell through. The studio couldn't lock down the character, so Wildey went back and reworked the whole thing from scratch into the boy and the world we know. But that original test footage didn't vanish. Those two boys outrunning spears by hovercraft? That's Jack Armstrong, the show that never was, quietly riding along in the end credits of the show that replaced it, for the rest of its life. And here's a small injustice worth knowing. The man who created all of it nearly didn't get credit for it. The studio resisted a created by line. After fighting for it, what he got was softer than the truth. He poured a film director's eye into a cartoon, which is exactly why every week felt less like a cartoon and more like a movie. A spy movie every single week. Because that's what each episode really was, a miniature thriller. The DNA wasn't fairy tales, it was pulp adventure, radio serials, comic strips, early Bond, globe-trotting men with guns and gadgets, racing to stop a madman before the clock hit zero. So kids weren't watching a cartoon in the way we usually mean that word. They were watching a weekly espionage picture, shrunk just enough to fit a television set. Egypt one week, the Himalayas the next, the bottom of the ocean after that. And yet, for all its hard science and real-world danger, the show carried one strange contradiction it never bothered to fix. Science fact and quiet magic. Johnny's adopted brother, Hadji, could do things science can't explain. He pulled off feats that bordered on the mystical. Levitation, snake charming the impossible. As kids, nobody blinked. Of course he could. Watch as an adult though, and it's a real puzzle. This was a series obsessed with realism. Real weapons, real physics, real geography. And sitting right in the middle of it was a boy performing actual magic, with the show never once trying to reconcile the two. Hard science and the supernatural, side by side, no explanation offered. A modern series would explain that contradiction to death. Jonny Quest just let it stand. That was its charm. But the show's relationship with other cultures wasn't always so charming, and that's the part that hasn't aged like a classic.
You can't identify with some of these things that come out with armor and guns and swords come out of their arms.
What it got away with that we cringe at now. Watch it today, and some of it stings. The foreign cultures, the broad accents, whole countries drawn as exotic backdrops for an American boy's adventure. A lot of it reflects the casual stereotyping of its era. The great villain himself was modeled on an old, ugly caricature of Asian menace. At the time, almost nobody in the audience blinked. To be fair, the same show did something quietly ahead of its time. Hadji, intelligent, calm, often the level head in the room, may have been one of the very first non-white heroes in American animation. The show held both things at once, a step forward and a fistful of blind spots. And those blind spots would become a problem. Not in 1964, when no one objected. Decades later, when someone finally sat down to put the show back out into the world and didn't know what to do with what they found. But before any of that, the show had to die. And it died for a reason almost nobody would guess.
Holy mackerel, you know, I can do that. I can do that as well as anybody else. Anyway.
Too good to survive. Jonny Quest was a hit. Critics liked it, ratings were strong. By every normal measure, it should have run for years. It lasted 1 season, 26 episodes. Then it was gone. Why? Not because audiences left, because it was too expensive. All that detail, all that realistic film quality animation Wildey insisted on cost a fortune. When the time came for a second season, the head of the studio reportedly said no. It simply cost too much to keep it that good. Sit with that cruelty for a second. The show got away with everything except its own ambition. The exact quality that made it special is the quality that made it impossible to afford. It wasn't killed by the violence or the watchdogs or the controversy. It was killed by being too well made. And here's the bitter punchline. Those 26 episodes went on to make a fortune, just not for the people who gave up on them. In reruns, they played for years, eventually airing on all 3 major networks. A show too expensive to continue became a goldmine in repeats, the way another canceled 1960s series, Star Trek, soon would. Nobody saw it coming, so nobody held on. So those 26 episodes were all there would ever be, which is precisely why what happened to them later matters so much. The episodes that kept getting cut. Here's a detail that says everything. When Jonny Quest was finally released on home video decades later, some episodes weren't left untouched. Dialogue was removed, scenes were trimmed, and stereotypes that passed without controversy in 1964 were softened for modern audiences. Later releases restored the original versions, but the edits happened. Think about that. A cartoon from the Kennedy era was still considered too controversial to show exactly as it first aired. The timing explains why. While Jonny Quest was on television, watchdog groups were only beginning to push back against violence in children's programming. By the time they had real influence, the series was already gone. It slipped through a door that closed immediately behind it. So what did Jonny Quest really get away with? Not just the gunfights, deaths, monsters, Cold War paranoia, or stereotypes. It treated young viewers like they could handle a dangerous world. It showed that courage comes with risk, that not everyone survives, and that life doesn't always offer easy answers. The show existed in a brief window, primetime television, inspired by live-action realism before strict standards reshaped children's animation. A few years later, many of its sharpest edges would never have reached the screen. You didn't misremember Jonny Quest. You just never realized how extraordinary it was for its time.